Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.
Hey, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Senior Bowl.
Yeah, Senior Bowl was last week. It's an important part of the draft scouting process because you get all these top players all in the same place at the same time, and not to run around, but to actually play football and do practices and everything. It's an important part of getting ready for the draft. And we've got some results and some people to talk about.
Yeah, I know that the Seahawks area scout, commented that this is a long process for them. So it starts in the fall. Obviously, they're going to college games. They're looking at tape, evaluating players in that way. Then they come to these bowl games, the Collegiate Bowl, the East-West Shrine game, and the Senior Bowl. It's really the first time they get a chance to go through an interview process, see these players up close. They confirm their priors, what they've seen in the fall and throughout the college season. Now they're seeing this in person. They begin that evaluation process that goes through the combine. The combine focuses more on athletic traits, and so they confirm all that stuff, and they go through these interviews and in-person workouts and all that stuff to compile all the information. And it's interesting, as I was kind of reading his comments about all that, I was thinking how futile it is for us to do all these mock drafts, because we're doing all of those mocks with about 50% of the total information needed to evaluate these prospects adequately.
Yeah, but make no mistake, we're going to do the mocks anyway.
Of course,
because they're fun.
Yes, of course. But 50% of the evaluation process is the mental side of this game, and we just don't have access to that, and nobody does except for front offices, general managers, area scouts, both pro and collegiate scouts. They all get together. They have massive meetings all the time. They really get into the nuts and bolts of who a person is, in addition to what they can do on the field, to see if they fit the culture and to see if that prospect is going to work his ass off, or is he going to be not a hard worker and won't fit into the culture and into the roster. And so it's very interesting. I just find the whole thing fascinating, and always have. I've started following the draft really fairly closely in the late 80s. And have just continued on every year since. And I've always wished I had access to some of that really team proprietary information that never really gets out. Nobody leaks that kind of stuff unless you hear somebody saying, well, he's got character issues or this or that or the other, and you never really know exactly where that's coming from. But anyway, getting lost a little bit off track. Senior Bowl wise, we had talked about this the last show, in that the week of practice is really where you gather the most intelligence for different prospects throughout the week. And then the game, while it's interesting and entertaining, most of the work is already done by then.
Yeah. Most of the scouts leave Friday afternoon once the practices are done. They don't stick around for the game. So you look at the game and you have all these stats and you can look at it, but if the NFL is not using it to evaluate the players, I always have a hard time taking it seriously. I mean, I know that the reason the Senior Bowl exists is for the week of practices and letting coaches and scouts get in there and work with guys.
So I did watch the game somewhat passively, I think. I watched different plays and generalities that I came away from in the game. I thought it was a mixed bag on the quarterbacks. The player that you liked most at quarterback in this game, actually, Jake Hayner, won the MVP award. Really, it was a limited role, 12 of 19 passing for 139 yards, had a great touchdown pass to Stanford's Michael Wilson, which was one of the favorite prospects that emerged for me out of the Senior Bowl week. I thought the offensive line played well overall, better than maybe the defensive line. Now, during the week, on the one-on-ones, the defensive line guys were kind of taking advantage and using some speed to make some plays. But overall, I thought the units worked well together, and the defensive line really didn't have a lot of impact in this game. So like Nick Broker, the offensive third, I thought played well. I think Seattle will have him on their radar in the third, fourth round kind of player. Nick Salbert DeVary, I thought played well and also played a little bit at the center position. Cody Mock, I think, really helped him himself out. He was kind of a smaller school, I think North Dakota State offensive tackle in college, but as he transitions into the pros, he's going to kick inside. He's got shorter arms, and not quite as tall as you want to have out on the edge. And so he spent a lot of time this week playing at right tackle. However, he played also at offensive guard and at center, where I thought he excelled really, really well. And it kind of suits him in the NFL. Particularly at center, I thought was intriguing to me, and might be on the radar for Seattle in that particular role.
Yeah. Looking at the week kind of in totality, there's some guys that really made you kind of take notice. Defensive tackle Keanu Benton out of Wisconsin is a guy that won with speed. He won with power. Looked like a 3-tech, pass rusher. And probably saw his, people were talking about him as a third or fourth round prospect. Now he's probably early round 2, just based on what was going on there. And someone who honestly, the Seahawks should be looking at, because he's the type of guy who you can put on the defensive line and get some of that interior pass rush pressure, which they don't have and need. So, now he's not going to be being looked at as a first round player, but maybe one of those 2 second round picks.
Yeah. It was interesting. There was a few guys that participated in practice but didn't play in the game. Keon White, I think, was the big name out of that group. I thought really helped himself, solidified himself, I should say, during the week. I think area scouts and front offices are well aware of Keon White, and it's just us on the back end, the pundits and guys that watch the draft are kind of catching up with him. I think he's going to be a name to watch now in the first round, probably for him. I'm going to try to say this name, Adabawore, I think is his name. Didn't play. Tank Dell, wide receiver, smaller stature guy, probably not on Seattle's radar, didn't play, but he's a big name in this game. Will McDonald, another edge rusher, linebacker type, didn't play. Rashee Rice and Isaiah Foskey as well. Players that might be on Seattle's radar. Rashee Rice is one of the top 5 or 6 wide receivers in this draft. Isaiah Foskey is a guy that's probably going to end up going in the second round. More of a 4-3-5 tech type of player, I think. Well suited to stop the run. He's known for that. Interesting.
Running through names faster than I can keep up. But,
I know. Rashawn Johnson is the other guy that didn't play. Broke his hand early in the week in practice. Only ran through like 2 or 3 plays in practice. Broke his hand. Ended up sitting out the rest of the week.
So, did you mention Cincinnati linebacker Ivan Pace?
I did not. But he had a great game.
He had a great week at practice, and he's a guy that people took notice of. Known for being physical, getting up at the line of scrimmage and making plays, being a solid tackler. And then he had a good game too. Showed up several times, kind of stood out as being, one of the more elite players there. Definitely with the Seahawks looking at linebacker being, middle linebacker being one of the problems last year. Definitely someone that the Seahawks should be looking at, but I don't know if they're going to take linebacker as early as they would need to get him?
I don't know. I mean, when you really take a look at it, and we're going to have a roster building show this week as well. When you take a look at it, Keith, and our main guy has got an ACL and is likely not ready for the season to begin. May show up, mid-season, basically. I think that it's likely that we address that position. Now, Cody Barton as well, free agent. We don't know if he's coming back. They may rebuild this entire thing, and it may end up being through the draft or I think potentially free agency. At least one guy to be able to come in and solve that problem, or at least help.
It might be both, right? If Barton's gone and Brooks is hurt, then you need two middle linebackers in this defense, and they could probably do one of each. Just go get a draft pick, a player that can play there, and then also get a player that in free agency, and so you've got both there, and then when Brooks is back, then you have the problem of how to get three good players on the field in two positions, and that's not a bad problem to have.
Yeah, and there's some good middle linebackers in this draft in the first 3 rounds. I think Seattle's going to get good value. Now, I don't know that it's necessarily going to come in the first round. I don't know that the value at that position is there for them, depending on the way the draft falls. But second and third round, it could definitely have an impact, especially when you've got 5 picks in the top 100. This game, it was just kind of a sleeper. I mean, there was good play from a couple of cornerbacks. I thought that the interception returned. Well, I'm trying to look for his name right now. Anthony Johnson, Jr., who I like in this draft actually is a player with size and length and speed at corner. Had a really nice interception and return for a touchdown in this game. Other than that, I thought the defense was somewhat vanilla, and nobody really completely stood out for me. I was looking for some of those edge rushers, the kid from Army, Carter, and a couple of players that didn't end up playing. And I just thought that I was hoping for a little bit more standing out. And I didn't see it. I just didn't see it. Hall, the running back, played well, especially in the first quarter, when his side of the ball came out and really wanted to run the ball and establish that. He ended up running hard and looked good doing it. You mentioned Keanu Benton from Wisconsin. I thought he played well there in the middle. And there was one other. De'Alon Henley from Washington State, the linebacker, I thought played well. Illinois safety Sidney Brown, I thought played decent as well. Other than that, on the defensive side, I just didn't see anything. During practice, yes, there were a few standout plays and so forth, but I was just talking in the game. I just didn't really see anything. And on the offensive side, on both sides, I mostly noticed the offensive line play, and where I thought they played really well. I thought the players that I was looking for to play well on the interior of the offensive line really stood out to me, and I think that aligns with where Seattle, I think, is going to be looking in this draft too. The interior of both sides of the ball, and I thought Nick Broker helped himself out in that regard, being able to play a couple of different positions. Nick Salvaderovi played well as well and took snaps at center. Cody Mock, again, I think is an underrated player out of this draft, and that's where I was focused.
Yeah, I mean the offensive line is usually one of those positions that struggles at the Senior Bowl because it's just easier for the defenders to win with athleticism than to have a cohesive group of guys that can work together the way an offensive line has to with 1 week of practice. But this year it seems to kind of be the other way around. The offensive line really looked good. There's a lot of high-end talent at the Senior Bowl at the position, so it ended up working pretty well. The other, you want to talk about Stanford wide receiver Michael Wilson, a guy that most people aren't thinking of because of the fact he plays for Stanford and they've been terrible, and he was hurt a lot but
He
he
was
looked
a lot,
really good.
which is a
out there.
concern for me. I mean, you kind of have to look at medicals on that sort of a player. The other guy that I thought played well in this game, there was two tight ends. Durham from Purdue, I thought played well, and then during the week, mostly, I had a couple catches in the game. But Luke Musgrave out of Oregon State, everyone was talking about him because they didn't really have information on him. Only 2 games played in 2022, but he's got all the athletic upside that you're looking for in a pass catching tight end in the NFL. Really helped himself.
Yeah, I saw a quote that had an anonymous scout. You know, those are always awesome, but it mentioned Musgrave as a potential multi-year All-Pro. Like
Wow.
that's what they said that's where his potential is, because he's just the way he runs and that his fluidity that to
Yeah.
run at that size is a guy that just is not going to be coverable even at the next level.
And everyone's talking about Michael Mayer and the draft as being, you know, a top 10 talent wise, positional value wise. He may end up lasting a little longer, you know, down into the 20s or so. But Musgrave's just right up there as well as far as bringing value to a team in a pass catching role. Now, I don't know too much about where he's at as far as his inline blocking ability and stuff, but that's not what you're going to ask him to do in the NFL.
True. And you know, I mean, that's
I mean, a
it
guy
is,
that size at
yeah.
265 running a 4 in the 4.4s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, holy
And to
cow.
do it fluidly. This isn't like straight line speed. This is someone who runs kind of like a wide receiver and is very fluid and is going to run away from linebackers. Is going to be bigger than any safety or corner, and is just he's going to present massive problems for opposing defenses.
So I was going to point out one game for one play for you, and then talk about the size factor. So you had mentioned Ivan Pace out of Cincinnati, linebacker. He blew up that one play. I don't know if you remember, where he kind of ran into Osiris Torrance, the 337-pound guard, and blew up the play and blew Torrance back into the spot where he also self-tackled his own running back in the backfield. And Pace was the guy that blew him up. But Pace is 5'10", 231 pounds with sub 31-inch arms. So as far as being on Seattle's radar, I don't know if that happens, but it's interesting that a player size came in and kind of blew that up.
Yeah, I mean, it is, but as soon as you're going through and you say the short arms, I'm like, not that he doesn't mean he's not going to be a productive NFL player, but the Seahawks under Carroll and Schneider have had measurables that they won't go under. Now they've changed some of them. They went shorter at cornerback for a couple of years, but they seem to have gone in the other direction the last year, and it worked out for them, which they got 2 out of their top 3 corners in the draft. So maybe they're going back on that, but other positions where they just have non-negotiables. And I know it's weird for people to think about that arm length and, you know, the difference a quarter of an inch can make. And,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, it's like,
Yeah.
who cares? But there are non-negotiables for Seattle, and anything, you know, under like 32 or 32 and a half at on the offensive line,
it's interesting
enough to go that way.
in these games. You have to be careful at the Senior Bowl because there's a lot of undersized players that ended up getting invites and being value players, especially for special teams in the 5th, 6th, 7th. A guy like Isaiah Land is a player like that, undersized, 6'3", 226 pounds. He's an edge rusher. That's not really a fit in the NFL for a lot of teams. Jackson State's Aubrey Miller had a really nice play in this game, blew a play up, but he's 5'11", 229 pounds. That's essentially no room for growth there. He's 5'11", 229. You can't add pounds onto that. So you either, you know, drop a little bit of weight or whatever, and you transition into a strong safety role in the NFL, or that's it. You're not playing linebacker at that size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the other alternative is to try and put on weight and get yourself up another 7-8 pounds without losing your speed and agility and that kind of stuff.
You might be able to play middle linebacker, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. Like you have options, but you're looking at just, you're a guy without a position, and so you either become a special team standout and a um, backup, or you have to try and learn a new position and alter your body slightly. The NFL is weird in that. So there are guys that are just that look great at college or whatever, and then they just never really get a chance at the pros because they don't fit the prototypes that the NFL wants for their defenders.
So I thought, one of the things that we want to kind of do here, especially tailored to Seahawks fans, is to talk about a few players that will be on Seattle's radar. I thought out of this game, I thought the running back Evan Hall, the guy that didn't end up playing, Rashawn Johnson, I think is a prototypical kind of NFL back for Seattle at 5'11", 225 pounds, has good speed, has a ton of yards from scrimmage, not just running the ball, but also catching the ball out of the backfield, 2,600 yards from scrimmage, 26 touchdowns over 4 seasons in a backup role, essentially, to Bijan Johnson and Bijan Robinson, sorry. And this player is one of the most intriguing players for me, because I do know Seattle needs to address this. And we may sign Penny back, but he's oft injured, and we can only depend on him maybe for like 8 games, right? Really, that's all he's ever played is 8 games in a season.
And that's I mean, I guess he played in more in 2021, but a bunch of those he was ineffective. It was the last 5 games where he was really good, and that got everyone excited for how good he could be.
Correct. Yeah, and he started the season off really pretty well this year.
Yeah, this year he did. He looked really good. Like there was a reason why he was the starter, and but he made it through 2 games.
Yeah.
So
what do you do?
Yeah.
So you sign him for a vet minimum, sure. Bring him into camp, let him compete. If he's available, he helps the team. The problem with players like this is you're holding a roster spot for that, and 2, you haven't really solved the problem of having 2 viable running backs that you can depend on during your season. Now, we saw Ken Walker was viable. I think he was injured a couple of different games, yes, but he was also carrying the primary load every game. And so we do need another player there at that position. And I don't think that prioritizing that and drafting a player high like Bijan Robinson is the key there. But finding a guy in the middle rounds that can carry some of that load would be ideal. And a player like Rashawn Johnson out of Texas, to me, is the prototypical kind of back that I would like to see Seattle invest in. A guy that runs with power and force and can get between the tackles for you, and give a player like Walker a series or 2 off every game. You're on mute, Keith.
Of course I am. So the guy that I've been kind of keeping an eye on and really liking is Evan Hall out of Northwestern. He at 214 pounds, not quite as big as I think what you're looking for, but he runs decisively, runs downhill, and has some short area quickness to make guys not be able to square him up, and so he's always falling forward. And he had more rushing yards on the first drive of the game than anyone else had in the rest of the game entirely. So he had 41 on that drive. No one else had more than 40 overall as the rushing yards in a game. He ended up with 74 rushing yards, so almost twice as much as anyone else in this game. But ultimately, like, this is a guy who the offense at Northwestern was kind of terrible, just all around, but he had almost 1,500 scrimmage yards, last year and had 21 touchdowns. So a guy that was productive without talent around him, runs hard, runs downhill, always falls forward. Um, yeah, just one of those guys that if Seattle wants to continue running the ball inside a lot and running that inside zone, they need a guy who can run between the tackles. And Hull's kind of one of those guys that has impressed me with his ability to do that.
Yeah. In addition to the kid from Stanford at wide receiver, there were two other wide receivers that impressed me this week. Rashee Rice, I think, is going to be on Seattle's radar. Seattle has been trying to solve the third wide receiver position for a long time, and it'd be really beneficial for me as a fan for Seattle to solve that this year. Give our quarterback another weapon in our offense, and have a real stability there at that position would be nice. And a guy like Rashee Rice that runs precise routes, has decent size, really decent speed would be good. And the other guy I thought in this Senior Bowl that helped himself, and I'm going to butcher his last name probably, but was Andrea Osivas. 6'3", 205 pounds, speed for days. He's reported to be able to run a 4.22 40-yard dash. He holds the NCAA indoor record in the 60-meter at 6.71 seconds, which is blistering. And and apparently, the commentary out of the Senior Bowl was that this guy had the most fluid hips, in addition to running precise routes, and could beat you over the top and could also get underneath as well. That really painted him to me. And as a small school guy at Princeton, so you're going to have to work on him as far as route trees. I don't know where he's at on his development overall in that respect, but you can't teach this kind of speed and that 6'3", the size. He could be a sleeper.
Yeah, the size speed combination is really intriguing there. And again, I mean, it's Princeton. I can't honestly say I've seen this kid play. I haven't
either. I haven't.
But I do know when you talk about sprinters and guys that are track athletes and they post these great times, they tend to be straight line runners. They tend to be guys that they have one route that they do well, and that's the 9 route where they just go straight down the field. And granted, there's some value there because you can stretch the defense, you pull the safeties back, that kind of stuff.
But if a guy can get in and out of breaks,
but if the guy has
you can
smooth
teach
hips,
routes.
Yeah, you can teach routes. And the other part there with his hands, can he catch the ball? Because that's the Seahawks had one of those guys on the roster this year. Drake Young, right? The 7th round pick, who has the speed and height and all of that, but he couldn't catch the ball. He dropped everything in the preseason, ended up, not getting
Buried
much
on the
playing
depth
time.
chart.
And then, but then he actually worked his way back and got some runs on end arounds and got a couple catches at the end of the season. So, guy that one of those things that I think we need to look at going forward is maybe a breakout player next year, a guy that could take that role. But sorry, anytime you can go and get another weapon, you can never have enough weapons on offense, especially big, tall guys who run really fast and put a lot of pressure on the defense, because you look what they do to DK Metcalf, right? They're double and triple teaming him. And if you can put someone on the other side who can do similar things, even if they're not as good, but they can do similar things and stretch the defense back, that means you can't put that safety and just put them directly on Metcalf, because otherwise the corner is going to get beat and Seattle's going to get a long touchdown. So it helps everyone if you can, if you have another guy like that. So
if you if you're building this roster correctly, you're looking for Tyler Lockett's. You just are.
Yep.
Tyler Lockett's expensive. At some point, you're going to have diminishing returns. Now he's come off 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons, obviously, but at some point, that position could be susceptible. You're putting all your eggs in essentially 2 baskets: DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. One of those players goes down, there's nothing else there. We're scrapping the pile out on the street to bring in a wide receiver that's going to be able to help us out mid-season if something should happen. It'd be nice to have one of those guys on the roster.
That's what happened at the end of the year, right? When Lockett got hurt and it was just the Metcalf show, and the offense struggled, right? Because they didn't have anyone else to come in and pick up the load. Like I mean, Penny Hart's clearly not the guy. He 2 years in a row has gotten a bunch of snaps and done nothing with it. Goodwin looked good at times, but he was hurt down the stretch too, and so they didn't have him when they needed him. They just need to go restock, the rest of the depth chart at that position.
So if, give me a preview, if you will, of your roster building strategy around this position. If you're the Seahawks general manager, what do you do in several years now running? We've gone out to the free agency bargain bin and picked up a guy that can just come in and pick up 25 catches, 300 yards, a few touchdowns, nothing more. We've also drafted at the back end of the draft, not really looking for other than DS graduate. It didn't turn out. I guess that's maybe where I think Seattle tried to solve this and just didn't work. So what would you do? Would you go free agency? Would you look in the draft? What do we need to do?
I'm looking at a draft pick at this point because of what you said with Lockett. Now, Lockett's been very quietly like a top 15 receiver in the entire NFL for the last 3 years. He was had a little bit of he wasn't as good coming in part because, he, like every wide receiver, needed some work, and then he got hurt, broke his leg, and missed a chunk of a year. But once he settled into that role, he's been fantastic. But he's getting a little older, and as a guy who wins with quickness, not necessarily speed, that's something that continues to translate as he gets older. But the injury problem also only gets worse as you get older. And so having a guy that they draft that they can create a 3-man rotation with, where you've got 3 elite receivers that over the next 3 years, you see that third one slowly take over more and more reps from Lockett, sets you up to make that transition. I do think they need to draft a player that can enter into that role. And it's not like, Lockett's, they need to, they're going to draft Lockett's replacement and get rid of him. No, we're talking about like a 3-year transition. But you've got to have more than 2 guys, because if one of them gets hurt, then you've only got 1 receiver. And we saw how well that didn't work this year. You've got to have more than 2 guys that can catch the ball.
All right. How about on the defensive side, Keith? Keon White obviously is the marquee player that was on the defensive side of the ball in this Senior Bowl, but Isaiah Foskey is a guy that can stop the run, also affect the pass rush as well, from Notre Dame. Nick Hampton from Appalachian State, a smaller school guy, but is 6'3", 235 with 34-inch arms, helped himself out a little bit in this draft, I thought. You mentioned Ivan Pace, but he's got the short arms.
Anytime you've got a guy who from Appalachian State or, University of Texas, San Antonio, that's
right.
That's a callback to DK Metcalf.
But Tariq Woolen.
Or that's right. But anytime that you've got guys from these little schools that can come out here and show that they can play with the guys from the SEC and the Pac-12, that's when you get a guy who no one's talking about, and you see on mock drafts as like a 7th round pick, suddenly become a 3rd round pick, and then after the combine, now they're a late round 1.
Right. All of a sudden they've got speed for days, and you're going, oh my gosh, this guy's got length, speed.
And it is, and honestly, the player's not actually moving up draft boards that fast because the NFL knows about him.
Yes.
It's just that the media people, guys like us, guys that do all the mock drafts, that kind of stuff, have not watched Appalachian State. And so they just see a guy, see his production, his size, and go, okay, he's probably an NFL player. We'll put him down here at like the set or the 29th.
Well, here's his stat. Here's his stats. Those are crazy stats. So if you do this at Michigan, you would be on everyone's national radar as the number 1 pick. He did it at Appalachian State. Over 46 career games, racked up 175 tackles, 40 tackles for loss, 26.5 sacks, 11 passes defensed, 7 forced fumbles, 134 quarterback pressures, and 101 run stops. That's a lot of production, and no matter how you cut it, right?
That's a Power 5 player, like a caliber player, playing at Appalachian State.
Right.
And so but that's also part of, one of the difficulties that you look at is like, okay, that's a lot of production and everything, but he hasn't had to go up against,
Right.
big time talent
Right.
down in and down out for an
So
entire game.
remind me, Keith,
So-
and you may not remember, but there was a defensive end that Seattle drafted way back. I'm talking 25 years ago. That was from a small school that just washed completely because on paper he was great, but
my guess is you're talking about Lamar King.
Yeah. Where was he from? Wasn't he from like Appalachian State or something like that?
Yeah, he's from a tiny little school.
Lamar King.
And this was proof that Mike Holmgren was a great coach but a terrible GM, because he drafted King in the first round, said, he's like a 290-pound defensive end, said he's going to win with speed, he can win with power, he's like everything that you'll ever want at a defensive end. And then he did literally nothing in the NFL and just could not handle the grind of playing against good players.
Yeah. Right.
And
So you got to be wary. I mean, so a flyer on Nick Hampton from Appalachian State in the 5th or 6th round is one thing. To elevate this guy into some world beater and put him into the 2nd round or something is just not going to happen. But he's a nice profile, 6'3", 235, 34-inch arms. He's got nice pass rush moves, active hands, bend, beats blockers off the edge, etc. But to do it against the premier offensive tackles and guards in the NFL is another thing.
Well, yeah, and it's like, just because they've got the skills doesn't mean that they. If you've been winning because you are, a man among boys,
right?
Then going out and having to play against elite players who, some of them are flat out better than you, and to do it down after down after down. Some guys just fade in that. And I'm not saying this guy will. We don't know. We won't know until he gets a chance to play in the NFL for a while. But some guys just do. And it's hard to make that transition from Appalachian State to the NFL.
So a few players for Seahawks fans to kind of keep on their radar, maybe do their own homework on, would be cornerbacks Tyreek Stevenson out of Miami, Julian Brents, the corner out of Kansas State, I understand had a great Senior Bowl week at 6'4", 202 pounds. I think he probably helped himself a little bit in this draft. I don't know that he moved up from day 3 to a day 2 pick, but a guy that's got length and speed is always coveted at that position. Jamie Robinson, a little shorter in the arms, but he's an active player at the safety position. I think teams will fall in love with. Chris Rodriguez, the running back at 5'11", 224 pounds. I didn't particularly see him. I mean, he had a couple plays, but I didn't see him really running with authority. It didn't seem to have the body type that was an enforcer kind of a player, even at that size. So it'd be interesting to see him and how he's evaluated.
What do you think about Ty Spears out of Tulane at running
back? He's just so small to me, Keith. I just don't know what to think.
He's a guy that he is small, but he's so quick. And,
what do you do with that? What do you do with that in the NFL, Keith?
Well, the Seahawks have had Travis Homer on their roster for what feels like a decade. And he's the same type of guy. But I think that Spears is
5'10",
more athletic.
5'10", 205. I mean, what is Spears at? Weight-wise? Is he at 186 or something like that?
I thought he was at 195, but that may be just...
I don't have his numbers right in front of me, but yeah, that would freak me out a little bit. I don't know. Yeah, you talk about a change of pace guy, and that's great. And that's kind of where he would fit in the NFL, a kick returner, punt returner, change of pace, receiving out of the backfield kind of a guy. You really have to carve your niche as a player like that, because you're not going to run you're not going to be an every down player in the NFL.
No, you better learn how to pass block and pick up a blitz and be able to read what's going on and be able to routinely block a linebacker who's coming in, because you're going to be a third down back. That's what your options are.
If Seattle were to draft Michael Wilson, 6'1.5", 216 pounds, most impressive wide receiver at the Senior Bowl, and if Seattle spent a third-round pick on him, would you be a hater?
No.
Even though he doesn't have production in college and has been hurt a little bit. I mean, he seems like a good fit for Seattle.
You know who didn't have production in college and turned out to be all right? DK Metcalf.
Yeah, and Tyler Lockett.
Well, Lockett had a lot of production at K-State, but yeah, I mean, sometimes especially at wide receiver, what's the quarterback situation look like? What's the running game situation like? How bad's the offensive line? Does your quarterback have time for you to get more than three steps into a route before they're getting sacked? Like there's so many different factors as far as production at wide receiver that are out of the wide receiver's control that make me, I don't know. I'm not a stat sheet guy when it comes to evaluating wide receivers. I just don't think it's that important.
Interesting. So a few other players to watch. Jonathan Mingo, I thought, helped himself out at the wide receiver spot a little bit at 6'1.5", 226 pounds, big body wide receiver. Tavian Wicks, a big guy. Michael Schmitz, the 6'3.5", 305 pound interior offensive lineman that plays center. 32 and 3/4 inch arms, so 33 inch arms. That's a perfect prototypical center size. And I would have to imagine it would be on Seattle's radar. I just don't know where you would have to. Would you have to get him at 120 or trade back from 120 to 127 or something like that? Or not 120, pick first round 120 overall, or the 27th pick, or would you find him in the second round, or would he last that long, Keith?
I don't know. I'm thinking that he's a guy that if you traded back from the 20th pick overall in the first, so you're in the first round back to like 27, I think that's the kind of the range. If you're trying to expect him to get to that first pick, the first pick that you've got in round 2, I don't know. I don't think he's going to be there.
Yeah, interesting. Is there any other player out of this Senior Bowl that you think might be a Seahawk fit?
I know you mentioned him, but Deion Henley, the linebacker out of Washington State, is a guy that he's really active and he's fast and he's quick. And the big question was, how would he do again in coverage? Because at Washington State, there was a lot of, here, attack downhill, either go make a play on a running back or go get after a quarterback. And he did those things really well, but they had him in coverage a lot this last week. And he looked surprisingly good, like without any concerns whatsoever. And he's the type of guy that honestly, you could put him in the middle, and I don't think you're going to need a first or a second round pick to get him. He's basically, to me, a quicker and faster version of what they've already got at middle linebacker. So
Cody Barton.
Yeah. And so I think that he could be a guy, if you can get him in the 4th round and drop him in there, that would be a steal. Yeah.
And one of the things I think Seattle's going to try to do too, I think they've got their corners that they obviously, but they may be looking to fill out that room. There's a few prospects I thought in this Senior Bowl that I really liked as far as having the size and measurables that Seattle likes, over 32 inch arms, etc. Anthony Johnson had that pick. He's 207 with 32 and 7/8 arms. Darius Rush, Rejon Wright, Julius Brents, JL Skinner at safety at 6'4", 211 pounds with 32.5 inch arms. That guy's going to be on Seattle's radar. I didn't particularly took note of him in practice or at the game, so I'm not exactly sure how impressive he was there, but we should find out for sure. But
yeah, I mean, I would look at cornerback late, a developmental player, a Jeremy Lane type that you can get late in the draft and develop over a couple of years, because they're 4 deep at cornerback right now. They've got your 2 starters. You've got Bryant and Brown, are both young players on rookie deals there as your 3rd and 4th, and who knows which order that's going to be. But you're 4 deep at cornerback right now, with experienced guys who've got a lot of playing time. And so you don't need to go spend a draft pick on one. Go ahead and wait and get a guy that's got the physical attributes to be great, but is raw, and go teach them.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Let's get out of here for this show. We're going to come back later this week and do a roster building exercise for the Seahawks. What would we do if we were trying to build this thing out? You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. When you find the show at Seahawks Playbook Podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe button. That really helps us. Make sure you get those shows into your feed every week. We do 3 shows a week, sometimes 2, but usually 3. And we love this time of the year. If you want all the draft coverage, all the prospect coverage through the NFL draft at the end of April, make sure you tune us in, because we'll have all of that. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.